Good afternoon for everyone joining live. Welcome to another Lunch and Learn webinar from the Northern BC Community of Practice. The Community of Practice is a group of organizations and individuals whose purpose is to build restoration practitioner efficacy and capacity through improved knowledge sharing, communication, and collaboration, all of which we get to do today. We're guided as a COP by an organizing team with core members from Certain BC, the Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program, BC Wildlife Federation, and the Caribou Habitat Restoration Fund via HCTF. This webinar is being recorded in its entirety. You'll be able to watch it later on Certain BC's YouTube channel. Today, we are joined by Leah Sharpe, who works as a decision scientist in the Gulf Coast Science Branch of the Coastal Science Solutions Division in the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Applied Science and Environmental Solutions. She is going to share one way that ecosystem services are considered in management and decision-making. Take it away, Leah.
Thank you, May. I'm really excited to be here. Excited that we finally navigated all of the permissions and approvals to make it possible. As May said, I'm a decision scientist, so I work with a number of very intelligent, wonderful ecosystem modelers, ecologists, in order to do this work. I've been at the EPA for about 10 years, and in my time here, what I've been focusing on is the development of decision support tools and approaches for better incorporating ecosystem service concepts and thinking into decision-making at a variety of levels and done by a variety of folks. Today, I'm going to begin by giving a bit of an overview for how folks at the EPA are approaching ecosystem service work. And then I am going to go into a bit more detail about one of the decision support tools that we've developed. And I'm going to wrap up by talking about how this tool is used in a collaboration with an external partner into identifying and prioritizing their ecosystem services for decision making. So you get a little bit of everything in this talk. So, as I'm sure everyone here knows, ecosystems services, the benefits from nature, humans are impacted by the environment in innumerable ways, and you can talk about them in a variety of ways. Things like clean air for the public, clean water, food you can eat, but also things like natural hazard mitigation, the ability to recreate in attractive areas, that kind of stuff. So because of the range of ways you can talk about ecosystem services, describing them for decision-making can be complex. It can be a challenge not just to describe them consistently, but to use terms that are clearly understood by stakeholders, as well as being meaningful for managers. Also, to describe them comprehensively. What do you need from the ecosystem to get that benefit? A single fish does not recreational fishing make. And also describe how changes to the ecosystem can impact those services. So at the EPA, we are taking the approach of thinking about final ecosystem goods and services. So these are the biophysical components of nature that are directly enjoyed, consumed, or used to yield human well-being. So thinking about that, thinking about ecosystem services in that very tangible handoff point where folks interact with them, where folks get them from the environment, talking about the fish that they catch rather than the underlying biota that make that fish possible. We also, when we talk about final ecosystem goods and services, we think about them as arising from a combination of things, a combination of the where. So where is that service arising? The who is benefiting from it, and the what. What specifically do they need from the ecosystem in order to receive that benefit? So making it very specific, very tangible. This kind of beneficiary-centric approach really focuses in on the elements of the ecosystem that are meaningful to stakeholders. This can make it more easy to communicate to a wide range of audiences while keeping the focus on things that are ecologically relevant and things that can be operationalized for managers. This also requires consideration of those ecosystem service attributes in the context of use. So thinking about, in what combinations do you need those attributes for the service to arrive? As we said, you don't just need fish for recreational fishing to be possible. You probably care something about the cleanliness of the water, the attractiveness of the area, and also thinking about at what levels you need those things. So again, you need more than one fish for recreational fishing. And the EPA has developed this National Ecosystem Services Classification System Plus. It's a classification framework that contains set lists and definitions of answers to those where, who, and what questions. So specific defined lists of beneficiary roles. And this framework and those lists have been used to provide consistent structure and approach across EPA tools. And I'm not going to be able to get into all of these tools today, either fortunately or unfortunately. But here are 6 tools, all of which are publicly available, all of which use those Nexus Plus lists. They are designed to do different things, to be useful at different points in a decision-making process, but the consistency of that language is designed to help make it easier for folks to move from one tool to another when trying to incorporate more than one tool into their decision making. The reason Microsoft Word is everywhere isn't because it's the best, it's because it was everywhere and it talks with Excel and all of the other items in the Microsoft bundle. So there's a link later to where you can go to find more information about all of these tools. But for now, I'm going to focus on the final ecosystem goods and services scoping tool. This tool is designed to help users identify and prioritize stakeholders, the ways they're benefiting from the ecosystem, and the environmental attributes necessary to realize those benefits. It's a downloadable executable with minimal data collection needs and savable, shareable files so that this tool can be used in an iterative and collaborative fashion. It uses the Nexus Plus framework as well as a multi-criteria decision analysis approach. So what is multi-criteria decision analysis? Well, it's a structured approach for prioritization. Decision criteria are chosen for prioritizing amongst a set of options. Decision makers weight those criteria. This is subjective. It indicates the relative importance to decision makers, what they think the influence of each criterion should be on the decision. And that this step, the weights, has the same influence on all of the options. Those options are then scored for how well they meet those criteria. This is objective. It, as I said, indicates how well an option meets a criterion, and it's individual to each option. So what this could look like, if you want to give an example, if an EPA work group was buying a team car, we can choose these decision criteria together, right? Things like cost, cargo capacity, fuel efficiency, number of passengers. And we can use information from the manufacturer to objectively score each criterion. And in fact, that's what I did to get these numbers. They've been normalized on a 0 to 100 scale, but they arise very directly from the manufacturer information. So we might disagree about the relative importance and influence of the criteria when picking a car, but we can agree on those scores. Those are objective. Those are arising from objective information. What this looks like, so if you set these weights evenly, you'll see that there's not a huge amount of difference from one option to another. Maybe the Tacoma has a little bit of an edge. But I'm on this team and I'm saying, hey, we're the EPA, fuel efficiency should be the most important thing. After that, I really care about passenger number because I want the whole team to be able to get in the car when we go for lunch. When you do that, you see that the RAV4 Prime ends up being far and away the choice of vehicle for this team. But Gina, another team member, is saying, hey, budget matters a lot. We don't have unlimited funds, so budget matters a great deal. Then fuel efficiency, and then, can we all fit in the car to go to lunch? Instead of arguing about what's more important, fuel efficiency or cost, we can just look and see what happens when we use her weights instead of mine. And although it's not as dramatic a win, the RAV4 still wins. And so this is just an approach where you're able to separate the more objective elements of a decision from the subjective ones, so you can focus the decision making on those subjective elements when necessary. And what the scoping tool is a structured method for prioritizing stakeholder groups, beneficiaries, and those environmental attributes using what is functionally a tiered MCDA approach. In the first step, users prioritize stakeholder groups. And in the second step, the stakeholder prioritization is used to give priority to the beneficiary roles identified for each group. And then in the last step, the beneficiary prioritization is used to give priority to the environmental attributes needed by each beneficiary group. So this is what the tool itself looks like. It begins with decision makers, tool users being presented with a set of 9 different criteria for distinguishing amongst stakeholder groups. These criteria came from the literature, both peer-reviewed and gray, from decision documents, from practices. They're not considered mutually exclusive, but we were aiming to be as comprehensive as possible in capturing the things that people are using when they're considering stakeholder groups. And so decision makers are asked to first weight these stakeholder groups, and what that looks like in the tool itself, if you download it, is little boxes. And when you enter your weights in there, in this case, for this example, I just set them all equal. You come up, you see the relative influence that each criterion has on distinguishing amongst the stakeholders. You're then asked to enter all of your various stakeholder groups here. There is no mechanism in the tool itself for ensuring that you've entered every possible stakeholder group, but the fact that you're doing this in such a transparent fashion, if you have missed something, it's easier to identify that and point it out. Once you have identified these stakeholder groups, the tool provides a little rubric for scoring each stakeholder group on how well it meets a given criterion. This is designed to be not a data collection activity, but something that you can do with your knowledge and familiarity with these stakeholder groups, not something where you have to go out and collect information, bring back information. This is designed to be an easy lift and, best available knowledge, not a precision instrument. And the result from that first step is a prioritized set of stakeholder groups, along with information about what criteria are driving that prioritization. In the second step, it's very straightforward. You're asked to segment each stakeholder group into its constituent beneficiary groups. So thinking about perhaps a boating club, what are the ways in which they benefit from the environment? Well, not just boating, but also fishing, probably swimming, maybe enjoying the viewscapes. That's what you're being asked to do. And the tool itself, you have a little drop-down menu up here. where you select each stakeholder group in turn, and then you have a list of these beneficiary groups. These come, again, directly from the Nexus Plus system. And you're just asked to slice that stakeholder group up like a pie and identify the ways in which it's benefiting. The output from this step is a prioritized set of those beneficiary groups, along with information about which stakeholder groups are benefiting in what ways. Finally, and is this advancing? Just want to.
Yep.
Okay. Phew. Finally, the final step is very similar to the previous step. Your users are asked to slice each beneficiary group into identify what are the attributes you need in order to receive that benefit. So the idea of that, if you are a fisherman, it's not just the fish, right? What else do you need? And you have these drop-down menus, again, where you've got these to pull down which beneficiary group you are talking about. And you have these lists of attribute categories, again, from Nexus Plus that you can use to identify which attributes are relevant for each beneficiary. And here you get final output, which is a prioritized set of environmental attributes, along with information about what kind of uses are driving that prioritization. So that's the tool itself. As I said, it's publicly available. And you can use it on its own, but I'm talking to you today a little bit about one of the very cool things we're doing with it. And we're using it as part of a tool, approach, concept that we're calling the ecosystem service gradient. So the ecosystem service gradient is a descriptive model of ecosystem services. It's based on measurable, ecologically important attributes, and we use them to describe a production of ecosystem services across a gradient, whether it's stressors, whether it's environmental condition, whether it's restoration effort. And the idea is that this can be used to provide a rational and consistent means for setting targets, as well as to communicate the consequences of different management choices to a wide range of audiences. The approach for building an ecosystem service gradient we've laid out in 5 steps: identifying what ecosystem goods and services are relevant, how they can be measured, and then figure out what ecosystem services do we currently have, what could we have in future scenarios, and then thinking about what do you want, examining co-benefits, examining trade-offs, because unfortunately, we all know we can't get everything. So as you might have expected, that first step, question of what ecosystem goods and services are relevant, well, that's something that is that the scoping tool comes in particular use for. You'll notice for these other steps that other tools that I mentioned earlier can be used. Unfortunately, I'm not getting into too much detail about these, but just wanted to flag that they are in play as well. So when you're thinking about ecosystem services, it's easy to put this conceptual model together, but that's not how things work. Ecosystem services are not a monolith. Not all environmental attributes respond to changes in environmental condition in the same way, and that varies not just across environmental attributes, but it varies from beneficiary to beneficiary as well. So while you might begin with this idea of here's how biological condition will change along with a along a restoration effort. When you start thinking about a specific beneficiary, in this case, property owners, you have to think about all of the different environmental attributes that they care about, all of the things that feed into their property owner benefit, and think about how they might vary along that gradient of restoration effort. And then think about how those individual attributes fit together to communicate something about the overall benefit to property owners. And as I said, that's something that will vary. Can look very different. Those underlying attributes will look very different for other beneficiaries, and how they come together will also vary. So again, just wanted to take the moment to underline that not just is this the beneficiary approach that I mentioned earlier, but here's where those questions of in what combinations and at what levels really comes into play full force. Because if we're wanting to describe what that ecosystem service experience is like, we can only do it if we're really thinking about it in the context of use, in the context of what the user experiences, and questions of combinations and levels is going to loom large. So we're working with partners in the Saugus River watershed. It's a small watershed in Massachusetts on the Atlantic coast of the US, and it's part of the much larger Massachusetts Bay's National Estuary Program. We're working with a local partner there to develop ecosystem service gradients that they can use to identify local community restoration priorities. The first step, as we mentioned before, is to identify these key stakeholder groups and how they use the river. What are the ecosystem services they care about? So we used the scoping tool, and we began by identifying a very long list of stakeholder groups and working with our partner to apply the scoping tool and determine what are the ways that they use the river. And again, I think it's worth mentioning that this scoping tool results also share information about the relative importance to different stakeholder groups. So it's not just a priority list, you've got some information embedded in that list. After identifying those priority uses, we identified the environmental attributes that the users cared about. Again, containing information about types of users and information about the types of users who care about each attribute. So this gives us top categories of uses and users, as well as top categories of attributes. I'll also mention here that in addition to using the scoping tool, we used one of the other tools in that circle diagram that I mentioned earlier called the document reader, which can plow through thousands of documents and use them to give you a rough prioritization. So we use that as another sort of checkpoint at this step. So once we have our top uses and attributes, we then work to identify metrics and data so that we are able to quantify this range of values, what's been lost, what could be gained. And I'll mention here that we used another of the tools from that diagram called the VEGS metrics report, which lays out a structured process for identifying metrics that measure specific tangible biophysical features that are relevant for management, as well as metrics that require little to no technical explanation so that they are easily communicated to a wide range of beneficiaries and stakeholders. Not going into this, but just wanted to flag that this is what we used. And we used that report to come up with metrics for 27 different estuarine and wetland beneficiary groups. This is a lot of metrics. For recreational fishers alone, there were 29 potential metrics across 7 different attribute categories, which is very useful as a starting point, as a library to refer to, but that is too many metrics. We cannot reasonably use all of these metrics. And so we worked with our partner in order to create what we call beneficiary-specific indicator bundles. So moving from that very long list to a much shorter list that were chosen with the specifics of the Saugus River beneficiaries in mind, things that matter not just to the most important metrics relevant for these very specific beneficiaries. After we came up with a short list, the next thing we did was to weight and categorize them. Not all of these metrics are equally important to a given beneficiary. For example, if you're talking about recreational fishers, this dark maroon color, those are relevant for edible fauna, so fish, right? Fish obviously matter a great deal more to fishers than, say, bottom structure. So this relative weighting is extremely important because when you're moving from this to this, you want to make sure that each element has an appropriate influence. You don't want things thrown out of whack. For an example of why this matters, a recently published paper led by my colleague Susan Yee put out a demonstration ecosystem service gradient for coral reefs. This particular example looks at scuba divers. And you can see we had again, a long list of potentially relevant metrics. And for this demonstration, we used all of them and we treated them all equally. And you'll see that you get this sort of weird flattening effect. And that's because all these metrics were included. There's no weighting. They're all treated the same, which means things like lack of macroalgae matter just as much as things like large coral abundance and charismatic fauna, which is probably not the case for actual scuba divers. So when we go from this hypothetical example to Saugus River, what we've done is we have, for our top 5 beneficiaries, we have these short lists of weighted metrics. And what we're working on now is gathering data layers and quantifying those attributes and the resulting ecosystem services. From a practical perspective, as we move from the theoretical to the practical, we're also needing to do things like identify substitutions. When we don't have data or information on that ideal metric, what kinds of types of information are reasonable substitutes? If we don't have information about soil quality, would water contamination be a reasonable proxy for what that particular beneficiary was interested in when they identified that as a key metric? We're also looking at creating some rules for combining this information into a single indicator. As we said before, not all of these things matter in the same way. If you are thinking about recreational fishing, particularly if the folks are fishing for food and you don't have any edible fauna, then you don't have recreational fishing. It doesn't matter how much of the other attributes you have. So things like figuring out if there are these sort of go, no go metrics that should be considered in that way. Other kinds of attributes might be more on a scale of good to bad, where the more charismatic birds that you can watch while going fishing, the better. But if you have no charismatic birds, you still have a fishing experience. There are also metrics where it's more of a window situation, where when you fall within that window, things are great. Outside the window, maybe not so much. And so we're working with the actual data layers with information about why these particular things matter to each beneficiary in order to come up with these priority sets of metrics and combine them in a way that holds true for logic. So to wrap up, I really want to underline that one of the key things that we did with this work is we made sure to emphasize this beneficiary-specific, beneficiary-centric perspective. This can be a very powerful tool for exploring and communicating the complex interactions and impacts that decision-making and decision management actions can have on the user experience for folks. But it is a shift because we're not used to beginning with that kind of perspective. This also really emphasized the importance of considering ecosystem services as collections of ecosystem attributes in order to capture the complexity of human interactions with the environment. The idea is that this will give folks a better picture of what the impacts might be and hopefully reduce the likelihood of unseen consequences. And finally, this work is part of this growing set of connected tools using the Nexus Plus framework. The existing decision support tools can be leveraged to help build an ecosystem service gradient, and consistent use of the Nexus Plus framework facilitates using this and other tools together. Again, I am not saying that the Nexus Plus framework is the perfect, is the ideal. I'm saying that the more connected things are, the more easy it is to move from one tool to another, the more useful all of those tools become. And we have been using the Nexus Plus framework as a way to facilitate that tool interoperability. I'm going to be sharing these slides with May so she can share them with anyone who's interested, but I just wanted to briefly point out the resources links to resources that that are part of them. So there's a link to the Nexus Plus framework. There's a link to the scoping tool, as well as a couple of publications on the tool. The link to the metrics report, link to publications on the ecosystem service gradient, as well as right in here, a link to the ecosystem service tool selection portal, which you can use to find out more information about all of the tools that I mentioned today, even those that I didn't go into any detail about. And just want to acknowledge all of the folks who've worked in this field, on this work, on things leading up to it, and part of it. And with a special shout out to Matt Harwell, who was one of the leaders in this space and connected me with May to get this set up. And so with that, I will stop and see if anyone has any questions.
That was awesome. Thanks, Leah. I have turned on anonymous Q&A. So if people wish to post your questions using the Q&A feature in Teams, please do not hesitate to do so. I can moderate your questions there or in the chat. In the chat, of course, you will not be anonymous. I'm also turning on the option to put on your cameras and microphones if you wish to be so bold and share a bit of the spotlight. You know, many of us are introverts in this world, and it can be a little uncomfortable, but I encourage you, put yourself out there. I really appreciate, for my part, the vehicle selection example to kind of bring it home, Leah. The RAV4 is the clear winner there for me.
Yeah, I used that example as part of another a team conversation, and one of my colleagues ended up buying a RAV4, so it was persuasive.
Well done. Have our first question from Victoria, who is asking, were the stakeholders consulted on their ratings, or were their weighted choices assumed by practitioners?
So which are you talking about in the scoping tool example, or are you talking about in the application in Saugus River? When we're
Victoria, if you're willing or able to elaborate, you should be
sorry.
able to.
Yeah, I guess the application in the river, like there was that big long list of stakeholders. Just
Yes.
curious if,
Yeah,
that would be a lot of
no.
time to hunt everybody down and get their opinion on things.
100%. No, this was done on the best available information for, based on our lead partners' understanding of those groups, how they interact, what they've heard from them
Oh, okay.
throughout other things. So there is, yeah, they did not weigh in on. They didn't weigh in on it, but it would be fairly straightforward for someone to, and not necessarily crazy time consuming. Well, I guess it depends. I'm not going to say that. But it could be fairly straightforward to say, hey, for example, St. Mary's School rowing team, are we right? Is this how you're benefiting from the Saugus River, how you're interacting with the Saugus River? It's something that's from my perspective, having something be very transparent helps folks correct misapprehensions without necessarily having to go down rabbit holes or take a lot of something that can be, yes, this was done by our partners. We didn't consult with folks, but there could be ways for relatively straightforward check-ins.
Okay. I have another question.
Yeah.
If I can. So, like, were First Nations included in this type of scoping tool, or like, are they treated as stakeholders, or are they approached in a different way?
So this is sort of agnostic as to who is using it, who is being considered for stakeholders. The way in which, and I am going to cover your eyes. The way in which folks, where that kind of consideration would show up would be in the relative weighting of these of the criteria for distinguishing amongst different stakeholder groups, right?
Okay.
So if you were saying, hey, what matters to me is advocating for those groups who have, certain key rights, for not advocating for, but think of this as saying, which groups do you want to turn the volume loudest on amongst all your stakeholders? And so do you want to turn the volume louder on folks who have specific rights, or who have specific key roles in the decision-making process, like many tribal groups do? That would be a way to turn the volume up on those groups.
Okay, no, that's super interesting. Thank you.
Maybe additional context is that some places in Canada, we've moved away from stakeholders to interested parties or stakeholders and rights holders. I was just told recently about the old way of like staking a claim for mineral rights and how that worked in our gold rush part of the world up here.
Huh. Yeah, there are, yes, we use stakeholders in this. It is not necessarily the term of art. I've also shared this tool and some others with folks on our Tribal Science Council, and I'm well aware that ecosystem services is a term that is not at all favored by many tribal groups, and so yeah, this is we are aware of those things. And so one of the things that it would be great to do in the future is learn to alternatives that might be less off-putting for folks, because that can be a problem, even if the other elements are things that they might be interested in.
Okay. Other questions for Leah? Maybe while you're formulating your questions. Leah, I know you're going to send the slides around. I'll pass them on to everybody who registered, as well as the folks who got sucked into field work, the poor people, and weren't able to attend. But is there a link you could share with us where we could go to find out more about other tools in case people are keen
Yes.
to jump in there?
Yes. So I would like to show you this ecosystem services tool selection portal. And I'll put the link in the chat as well. But it's designed to help folks identify which of these tools might be most useful to them, given where they are, what work they're doing, where they are in the decision-making process. And we have 3 different paths. So 2 of them specifically looking at ecological risk assessments and contaminated site cleanup, but also one that's just sort of generic other decision-making processes where you're able to say, here's where I am, or here's where I would like some help incorporating some ecosystem service thinking. And then it will, if you click on the tasks that you're most interested in within those steps, it will suggest some tools that might be of interest to you. So if you click on them, you get a little bit information about, time and effort needed to use the tool, the kinds of questions it might answer, a link to the tool itself. So if you want to spend a little bit of time poking around in there, it's a great resource for learning more about all of the various tools that I did not have a chance to talk about.
I think maybe everybody on the call knows I'm immediately gonna go download everything I can. It wasn't scripted, but I did put the link in the chat and type that fast.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Last call for questions for the decision scientist in the room. Feel free to unmute, ask away. I did like that the final EGS tool has a little checkbox for people who are not affected by the ecosystem, as if there were any such thing.
Well, it's so the reason that's in there is because there are some groups that are very much stakeholder groups, but they are not necessarily out there getting their hands wet, their feet dirty. They are, you might think of them as investors that are far afield that might be interested in developing a, who knows, whatever they want to develop. Where they themselves are not necessarily benefiting from or expect to benefit from the environment. You can't say that they're not stakeholders, because they absolutely are. But if you included them in that step of how are they benefiting from, how are they interacting, it would throw things off to a certain extent, right? Their very valid stakeholderness could swamp the actual ways in which folks are interacting with, benefiting from, or hope to benefit from the ecosystem that's under discussion. And so, yeah, we added that little box because, yeah, those groups should be considered up to a point, but then it becomes distracting to try to keep considering them.
Okay, I see we have another question in the Q&A, but Victoria, I noted you unmuted as well. Did you want to ask another question?
I know I just wanted to say thank you. This was a really excellent presentation. It's super interesting for us. I work in mining and reclamation, so yeah, it's really helpful to be able to communicate sort of weights of things with actual data behind it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And, my email is part of this, so please reach out if you have any questions. I'm always excited to talk to folks about these tools because, the more used they are, the more useful they become. So very excited.
So the question from Matt in Q&A, how are natural, okay, this is a multi-part question, Matt, what are you doing? First part, how are natural resource managers telling you they are thinking of using these cool advances you and your colleagues are making? Is it tactical for specific decisions? Conceptually to steer their thinking processes? Somewhere in between to get their partners to also start thinking and discussing these concepts?
Yes. So for the ESG work in the Saugus River and in Mass Bays, we have our partners who are our Saugus River partners are interested in using the ESG both to target where they might focus their restoration efforts, as well as help argue for funding. Say, hey, it makes sense for you to fund this living shoreline project because of the benefits to X, Y, and Z that it will bring. At a sort of one scale up at the Mass Bays level, Mass Bays has a number of approaches that they use to sort of monitor and track the health of their embayments. So looking at, habitat suitability indices, things like that. And this is something that fits very nicely in parallel with that in terms of not just, how good is this embayment at being this particular kind of habitat, but then what benefits do we see based upon that health of the embayment translates to these kinds of ecosystem service production. And so one of the things that we hope to work on in the future, if we get approval to do so, is to questions around translation from one embayment to another, scalability. What does it look like to move from, tiny Saugus River to big Mass Bays? How do you do that? So those are the things that we're hoping to do.
Good question, Mark. Sorry, I made you post it in 2 places.
Pardon?
You had posted it in 2 places.
Oh.
I didn't see it right away. My bad, mea culpa. Any other questions? I think we have addressed all the ones that have been typed out thus far. All right. Well, Leah, thank you for making time to share some of these very cool tools with us. I appreciate that you were able to narrow it all down too, even in light of my excitement and geeking out about all these things. I will for sure be emailing you and everyone. I'll send those slides around soon.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And yeah, if anyone has any questions, please email me anytime.
Enjoy the rest of your day, folks, and bye for now.
Thank you.